we fail to remember the fact that India is also the largest agrarian society in the world. In fact, 30% of India's population is indirectly employed in agriculture, and 150 million people, or just above 10% of India's population, is directly employed in agriculture. This makes India the largest country by the number of people employed in agriculture. When it comes to Indian agriculture, there's something that is very crucial to it, which is often forgotten, what I like to think of as the gem of Indian agriculture, and that is compost. Now, compost is a primary fertilizer of choice for many people in developing countries, including India. And there are two reasons for this. The first is the fact that compost is very cheap, accessible, and economical, so it's a no-brainer that farmers use it. But the second reason is that compost can be made from waste byproducts that are found on farms. This includes plant waste, animal waste, if it comes to it, even human waste. And this is particularly important because this allows for the upcycling of waste material that is found on farms into something that is extremely productive and useful. However, compost doesn't come without its own problems. In fact, there are two key problems that are associated with compost. The first is that compost takes a variable amount of time to mature. The maturity of compost is dependent on a lot of external factors that are extremely difficult to measure and keep a track of. And second is that if immature compost is applied to soil, it can lead to the immobilization of certain nutrients and cause that soil to degrade. And I noticed this problem when last year my grandmother bought a batch of compost that turned out to be immature. She applied that to a portion of the garden, and then the soil in that garden started to degrade. And I could see the dismay in my grandmother's eyes as she saw her prized roses wither into the winter wind. And so I knew that I had to solve this problem. And the scale of this problem is huge. In fact, of the 150 million farmers in India, 96% will or have used compost at some point of time on their farms. And of that 96%, 90% of farmers, unfortunately, have no data whatsoever about their compost. This puts 130 million farmers at risk of immobilizing their soil just in India. And so, to solve this problem, I combined my knowledge in machine learning and compost to create the first and only device there is to do both the quality and maturity analysis of compost. Now, when I first set out to solve this problem, I did what everyone would have done, a Google search. And that is when I came across an interesting characteristic of compost. That is the fact that compost acts a lot like light. It has a dual personality. The quality and maturity of compost coexist. The maturity of compost is the most important thing that we need to factor in before applying compost to soil. The maturity of compost is impacted primarily by the amount of microorganisms there are in soil, and a compost sample goes through multiple maturity stages during its lifetime. In the first mesophilic stage, or the infancy of compost, that is when microorganisms start accumulating in compost. And these are the microorganisms that will eat the waste material and convert it into compost. Once we reach and pass that stage, the population of microorganisms increases exponentially. That is when we enter what is known as the thermophilic stage. The rate of decomposition of compost starts happening at a very fast pace. And in a few days, the temperature of compost can go from 30 degrees Celsius to as high as 50, and in some cases even 60 or 70 degrees Celsius. When such high temperatures are achieved, the microorganisms in compost start dying out. And that is when we enter the mesophilic stage again. This time, it's the second mesophilic stage. And this stage is the culprit for a majority of soil immobilization. This is when many farmers put the compost in soil, which leads to soil immobilization. If this compost sample in the second mesophilic stage was let to rest for just a few more days, it would have entered what is known as the cured stage. That is when compost is matured, and that is when it can be applied to soil. The quality of compost is a slightly different story. It is like a cherry on top of a very good cake. The quality of compost is impacted by a lot of factors. That includes pH, moisture, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium content of the compost, the carbon-nitrogen ratio, and even things like the electrical conductivity of compost. Now, not all of these parameters are equally important, and we don't have sensors to measure all of these parameters either. Thankfully, with just 3 of these parameters, that is pH, moisture, and NPK content, we can determine the quality of compost to a very high degree of accuracy. Now, once I was done with the testing, with the research phase of my device, I had to decide which computer I'd be using. Now, I knew that I was going to implement machine learning, and having a computer that was capable of doing that was extremely important. Using a normal laptop would have been an overkill and very inaccessible for many farmers. And an Arduino, the very portable machine, unfortunately has no capability to do machine learning on board. So I settled with the very efficient Raspberry Pi. Then, after this, what I did was train 2 different machine learning models with 3,000 different samples of compost. The first model that I trained took in an image, and with that model, I was able to tell my Raspberry Pi whether that compost had matured or not. And this was by looking at the color that that compost sample had achieved. The second model that I trained took in numeric inputs from the sensors that I had attached to my device, and with that, it was able to tell you what the quality of your compost was. My device, my machine learning models achieved an accuracy score of over 95%, so they were pretty accurate. But I did not want to stop there, because if you were told that your compost is immature or of a very poor quality, so what? Leaving my device right there would be the equivalent of a doctor telling you that you have a very deadly disease, and then that doctor proceeds to leave the room. Not really an ideal situation, at least not one that I would want to be in. So I went back and did a bit of research. And this time I looked for ways through which I could improve the quality of compost. And I'm very proud to say that Compost not only does the quality and maturity analysis of compost, but it also has 23 different prescriptions that it can offer to users to improve the quality of their compost. Now, I'm very excited to be entering into a new phase with my device, and that is the distribution phase. In this phase, I want to give my device to as many farmers as possible all around the state of Rajasthan, and then eventually all around the country as well.